SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
And welcome back. Let's take you right back to OR Tambo International Airport. As you can see there, he has alighted there, and that's the British Prime Minister, His Excellency Keir Starmer, received there by the Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Mr. Alvin Boertes. And no welcome like a Pantsula Jive welcome here. A truly South African welcome there for Keir Starmer. And this is, of course, going to be a very, very, very important visit, strengthening once again those Africa-UK ties for the United Kingdom. That one of the things that would be top of the agenda for Keir Starmer, along with the other priority areas that South Africa has outlined in its presidency of the G20, and expecting much there in terms of the discussions. Well, I'm not alone. You know, Leanne is here, but also joined here in studio by Dr. Mbete. Dr. Mbete, and we're just rolling with the punches as you come in, because we are watching the arrival there of His Excellency Keir Starmer. Also joined from Nasrec in our studios there by the SABC's Mzwandile Mbeje and Sophie Mokoena, as I'd introduced before the break. Thanks so much to all of you. So Keir Starmer arriving. Sophie, let me start with you.
Well, I think it's quite important to see the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom touching down at OR Tambo International. Earlier on, when he was asked by media in Britain or in the United Kingdom, he indicated that this visit is quite important for him, not only from the perspective of the G20, but also in relation to strengthening the relationship with the African continent. As you know, South Africa is regarded as the gateway to Africa. And he pointed out, in terms of what he will be doing, other issues include him attending one of the railway, SA railway projects because of the infrastructure investment the United Kingdom is engaged in South Africa. And by extension, you know that the African continent is focusing on strengthening its infrastructure. And therefore, his visit, it's not only about the G20, but also about strengthening the political and also trade relations with South Africa. On the other hand, he also responded when he was asked about the United States of America taking a decision not to participate in this summit. Well, we had what happened yesterday, the conflicting reports, participating or not participating, but the U.S. want to come and participate in the official ceremony of handing over to the U.S. as the incoming G20 presidency. And that is participation by its own definition. And that's why when you look at the letter or the note verbal, there's a list of delegates from the U.S. part, those who are supposed to be accredited to come here on Sunday to be part of that handing over, including a high-power delegation of security. So when this argument of playing with words and semantics, it's participation, it's not participation, the reality is the U.S. want to be here to be part of the ceremony, and therefore they must be accredited, and there's a leader of the delegation who is the attaché, because there's no ambassador at this moment. And we had earlier on the president's spokesperson, Vincent Magwenya, saying that the president will not hand over to an official at that level. And therefore, you can see that there will be denial about the word participation, involvement, discussions. Those are politicians. They like to weigh in using different jargon. But as you pointed out, UK has touched down. It's not moving back, and they are really, really looking forward to be part of this important work that is under process now, because the talks have been going on. They are finalizing the text for the declaration. There's no turning back. G20 is going ahead officially with heads of state and government tomorrow. But today, quite a hectic day. The arrival of the UNSG also will indicate the importance of this meeting here in South Africa.
Indeed, and Dr. Sithembile Mbete, with the arrival of His Excellency Keir Starmer, and in the absence of the United States, it's important that other renowned world leaders, especially when we look at those who make part of the G7, for example, as part of the G20, the significance and the optics that that brings to the G20 Summit in Johannesburg.
I think that it's hugely important and significant for legitimizing this G20. There's been this sense in the last few weeks that this is going to be some kind of substandard or not the usual G20 because of the absence of the United States. And I think that the presence of other world leaders, such as Keir Starmer, I think is an important signal for the continued legitimacy and credibility of the G20 as an important club of nations. The second reason I think that Prime Minister Starmer's presence is important is because South Africa, the United States and the United Kingdom are going to be the troika from next year. So the G20, unlike the United Nations or the World Bank, is an informal club. It doesn't have a charter, so any official base document. It doesn't have a permanent secretariat. The governance of the G20 is done through the troika, which is the previous host, the current host, and the next host. And so having Keir Starmer here in the absence of Donald Trump means that the governance structure of the G20 is going to be meeting in a bilateral fashion with President Ramaphosa and Prime Minister Starmer in the absence of President Donald Trump. And that is a loss for the United States, that business is going to continue with the governance structure that the United States, that Donald Trump is going to need to work with next year. And I think that's a very important signal of the continuity of the G20's work. Finally, I think that we can't. We need to remember always that the G20 is an informal club of countries that are dealing with the politics of their own countries. So for the UK, for Keir Starmer, it's actually a quite nice break for him to be here because he's dealing with a lot of things in the United Kingdom, a lot domestically, and a lot of tension there. And so to come and be able to position the UK, which has been in a very odd role since Brexit, and a lot of confusion about what it is in the world, where its base of strength is. And so to be able to play a leading role in bridging the global north and the global south, in advancing some of the agenda around equity, around solidarity, in positioning the UK as a trusted partner in navigating this new multilateral order, I think that this poses a huge opportunity for the United Kingdom to reposition itself in global affairs.
And picking up on that point, Mzwandile Mbeje, you know, that's His Excellency Keir Starmer. Before him, we saw the arrival of the Prime Minister of Vietnam as well. And as Dr. Mbete says, these leaders are dealing with their own domestic issues on the home front, but coming to this broad political and economic, but a very important summit all the same for various other reasons. Let's talk about, you know, what is likely to emerge here, given the absence of the United States and growing tensions, geopolitical tensions among some of these countries, amongst themselves, with others that may not be here. How should we read all of this?
Well, a very good morning to you, colleagues. I think what is happening here, it really underscores South Africa as a key global player in these matters, given that everyone has responded positively. It doesn't have to be the leaders that always come. I mean, we know no summit has had all the leaders that come, but the majority of them are coming despite this campaign by the US. Tells you that South Africa is a global player and it's really respected. And then the fact of the matter is that what will happen is that after this, US will want to craft its own message, trying to perhaps remove itself from what was happening here. But but the fact that the Troika comprises of South Africa, US and UK, you will somehow find a way where they will find each other along the way. I mean, it's not going to be permanent, this kind of perhaps hostility that we're starting to see. This is part of the influence and the importance of a country like South Africa, coming from Africa, and a third world country, playing in the very big league. The fact that South Africa, as Sakina, was able to invite its colleagues from the African continent tells you that as it grows, it wants to grow with the rest of the continent. So perhaps that as time goes on, when the US takes over, will perhaps be able to understand why South Africa decided to move in this direction. But I can tell you, yes, right now there appears to be tensions. So in the next couple of months, when they are engaging on a continuous basis with the US leading, so things will somehow change. Because I can tell you, it does appear that everywhere everything happens, US wants to be the center.
Sophie, with regard to the final declaration, which will, of course, be very instructive, and we've already heard from the United States about, the traditional leaders declaration, which they will not accept. So let's talk to that, because we've had all of the sideline summits that were taking place in the lead up to the Leaders Summit, and that is, of course, supposed to make up a lot of what goes into that final declaration. But the United States already, from outside, declaring what they will and will not accept. So what are the leaders who are present to make of that?
Well, I think the leaders or countries, let me put it this way, the countries that will be represented at the summit and that will be participating, and they have already done that. The whole of this week, the Sherpa was steering the negotiations, item by item, line by line. And I was informed that there's progress in terms of the adoption of the declaration. As the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, pointed out yesterday, and you could see the confidence in the President that things are going the direction of South Africa, that there will be a declaration. The declaration depends on countries that are participating. The United States of America said they won't be participating, a boycott of some sort, and therefore they have no say in terms of what happens as it relates to the adoption of the declaration. These countries who are here, including the United Kingdom, will give direction in terms of the adoption of the declaration. If these 19 countries, including the European Union, which is a member of the G20, and the African Union, which is now a member of the G20, agree that a declaration in this form must be adopted, it will be adopted. Secondly, I spoke to the finance minister who's responsible to lead the discussions on finance tracking. He indicated that from their side, the finance track declaration was concluded. At some point in time, America even participated, even saying they would like to take forward issues that are related to the infrastructure. So it's done. Now it is the difficult one, which is more political, led by Minister Lamula, the Sherpa, the Presidency. That is what they are discussing now. When they have concluded that, they will combine the two streams and they will have a final declaration. Now, the US says they want to come to receive the reins in terms of handing over. They are not participating in the negotiations. Therefore, they can't stop these 19 countries, including these two organizations, the European Union and AU, taking a decision to adopt the declaration. And as I pointed out, talking to those who are close to the talks, who are in the room, they are saying there's progress. They are discussing item by item. In fact, I expected that on Thursday that part will be concluded. And now the leaders are looking at the copy so that come the summit, it's just the formality, it's just the photo op, it's just the signing. The real people who are doing the work are the Sherpa, are your finance track, and other role players, and bringing in different voices to reflect a more inclusive declaration as per the wish of South Africa, the South-South, and the African continent in particular.
Dr. Mbete, you spoke earlier about the Troika and of course, the fact that there is no permanent secretariat of the G20. Now, in terms of the declaration that is adopted at the end and continuity in terms of the priorities that are outlined and what is to be taken forward, how does that work? And especially from the perspective of the incoming president.
So you had Professor Danny Bradlow on earlier, and he spoke about how there have been over 130 meetings that have taken place over the course of the year, and of the about, I think, 22 working groups that meet repeatedly over a G20 presidency, and those working groups are co-chaired, so they'll have 2 of the G20 members that chair it, and it's the same chair each year. So there's a continuity, firstly, in terms of the chairing of those working groups, and the agenda in the working groups builds from year to year. So climate finance, for example, will have, from when it was established, that committee, I think in 2012, will have an agenda that builds iteratively every year based on what's happened also in other multilateral fora, based on what's happening in the world at any given point. And so that continuity of work from year to year within the working groups, and as Sophie has said, that is what feeds into the final declaration. So we all focus and look at the final declaration with the presidents because, well, you know, that's the fancy part of it. But the work that's gone into there has happened the entire year, and it's also going to continue the following year and the next year and the next year. And so that is how those commitments are built. And basically, the idea of the G20, it started out as a kind of crisis committee to deal with the financial crises, first the 1997 one, and that was the finance ministers meeting, and then the global financial crisis in 2008, has now almost become a global steering committee, where new issues that are arising that, you know, more traditional international institutions like the UN are too cumbersome to deal with. They've got these very formal institutions, get introduced through the G20, they get discussed, they get refined, they get panel beated, and then make it into more formal international institutions like the UN, like the World Bank system, like the IMF. And so the point here is that the work happens besides the summit. And the way the summit is and the leaders' declaration is meant to be a consolidating of everything that has happened. But because it is a consolidation, it's inherently a compromise document. It's always a compromise because some countries will like some of the stuff that's come out of the working groups, others won't. The other thing is that this is not the first time that we're in this position in the G20. In Hamburg in 2017, which was after Donald Trump's first presidency, so the first year of his first presidency, the United States also said that they were going to boycott the declaration because they'd pulled out of the Paris Agreement on climate change, and they didn't agree with what was being said on climate, and they didn't agree with what was being said on trade in that declaration. And in a lot of ways, the Hamburg Declaration, they eventually got to a point where they could pass and do a leaders' declaration at Hamburg, was almost a 19+1. At that stage, the AU wasn't part of it. It was the 19 states, and it was the 19 states and the EU and the United States, where the US sort of stood on its own in terms of a lot of what was in that declaration, but the declaration was passed regardless. And so I think in our catastrophizing about what has happened in these last few weeks around the US's position to South Africa, I think that we do need to understand the context, that it's not the first time that this has happened, that there is a great deal of tension and compromise involved in making these kinds of leaders' declarations, and that whatever the outcome is tomorrow, or when the announcement is going to be of the declaration, the work continues.
All right, and you're going to continue with us later on, but let me get a final word from Mzwai with regard to the political will after all is said and done, because it's all good to come out with any sort of document, Mzwai, the political will to make sure that we actually give expression to those priorities.
I think from our side, perhaps as South Africa, so we are very clear. I mean, what will happen here will actually show that South Africa is very serious about this kind of work. In fact, the doctor is reminding me of the Hamburg G20 in 2017. I remember there, I happened to have attended that G20 where the president of the US, Donald Trump, also given that they were not agreeing with a number of things. So he basically had so many side shows in terms of the media press conferences, so clearly taking away from what was happening. But as the doctor has said, that's what ended up happening. I see something similar here, Sakina, where I think the president of the US, who feels he must be really the man who is at the center, who's calling the shots, because he is not here, so nothing should go their way. So these countries, as Sophie has said, and Doctor in the studio there have said, are committed to what is happening. In fact, the US will realize that, yes, it's powerful, it's a powerful country, but you do need your allies, you do need to work with others to be able to achieve your objectives. My own guess is that as the US takes over this chairpersonship, this presidency, they will start to be somehow cordial in terms of how they deal with South Africa and with the UK. I think the fact that they will be the one at the center now, so they will make it easier to perhaps engage with everyone related. So the political will from these countries, the fact that they are here, even those that did not send leaders, they have delegations, tells you that everyone is serious about that which is happening. So yeah, the world proceeds. Yes, the US is a very key ally, and the fact, again, that they've indicated that they would like to be around on the last day tells you they are not out of it completely.
Well, final 30 seconds to you, Sophie.
Well, I think turning to the issue of these countries, as the doc there indicated that it did happen in Germany. Let's look back in St. Petersburg when Russia was hosting the G20 Summit. At that time, the US president was President Barack Obama, and the president of Russia was Dmitry Medvedev. There was an attempt by the United States of America to sneak in an approval to attack Syria. It was the G20 member states who said, hang on, this belongs to the UN Security Council. We are not going to be used to approve what was not approved at the UN Security Council. And therefore, you can see that it is not the first time that the US wants something and they don't get it, because countries are independent, they see things differently. And that was not put through to the G20 meeting at that time. And therefore, also confirming that the G20 is a forum, and therefore of a willing parties and countries, voluntary participation. It doesn't replace either your BRICS, which is another group, nor the UN, which is the world body, or any multilateral institution, whether you talk about the WTO, which is also important, the IMF and the World Bank. That's not an alternative for those other forums.
Well, thank you so much. From our studios in Nasrec, Sophie Mokoena and Mzwandile Mbeje, and with us here in studio, we have Dr. Sithembile Mbete. She's going to stay here with us, so we'll talk to her a little bit more a little later on. But of course, wall-to-wall coverage as the host broadcaster, SABC. And here on SABC News,